What you need to focus in on in your fantasy league is going to be upside, upside, upside. Most people step into their league just kind of assuming it's going to work out for me. I'm better than these other guys. I know what I'm doing. They don't, and I'm destined to win this league. Where in reality, the odds are stacked against you. If you're playing in a 10-team format, you on average have a 10% chance to win your league. If you are twice as good as the next guy, then that 10% chance goes up to 20%. Now, if you're going to be playing in a 12-team format, on average, you have an 8.5% chance to win your league. Whereas if you are twice as good as the next guy, then that's up at 17%. So in reality, you need to understand that it's not a given that you're going to win your fantasy football league. You are most likely going to lose, and you need to accept that fact for you to be able to actually maximize your probability of winning. So if we accept the fact that we are more times than not going to lose our fantasy football league, how do we get around that? How do we try to make that 10% chance, that 7.5% chance, up to a 30% chance we win, up to a 40% chance we win? What we do is we try to get rid of the chance that we walk away in 4th place, 5th place, 6th place, 7th place. I mean, you win no money there. Yeah, you don't get last, but who the hell cares? If there's no money, it doesn't matter. Now, what I would rather have is I would rather have half my leagues, I get 1st place. And the other half, I get 12th place. I'm completely fine getting dead last. Yeah, point the finger at me, call me an idiot. I'm cool with it. Now, of course, this strategy isn't exactly going to be for those people that may have to go to Waffle House for 24 hours if they lose their fantasy football league, may have to get a tattoo if they lose their fantasy football league. Okay, if there's a punishment for getting dead last, you probably want to be ignoring me in this video. But if there's not, the way that you go ahead and try to maximize your chance of getting first is by making correlated bets. I am sure you've heard for years now me talking about stacking in fantasy football. I'm doing it literally every single day on the live stream in those underdog drafts. And I understand a lot of people think it's only because it's on underdog. No, stacking works in any fantasy football format you're playing in. It doesn't matter if it's best ball. It doesn't matter if it's dynasty. It doesn't matter if it is redraft, a keeper league. It's all the same. Because when you go ahead and stack, you correlate your bets where instead of having to get, say, 10 different bets right through your fantasy football draft, maybe instead you only have to get 5 right. Now, the easiest way for me to explain this is by going through and looking at some recent examples. So let's go back to 2022. Say you were to go ahead and draft A.J. Brown in either the 2nd or the 3rd round in your fantasy football draft in 2022 when there was a lot of uncertainty of what the Philadelphia Eagles would be. Clearly, if the Eagles were a top offense in the NFL, given the talent profile of A.J. Brown, he would crush and he would most likely help you win your league. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, if the Philadelphia Eagles didn't take that step up, if the Eagles ended up being very disappointing, then A.J. Brown could look like he was losing you your league in the 2nd or 3rd round. But regardless of the fact, once you draft him at that price point, once you take A.J. Brown in the 2nd round of your draft, you're at that point pot committed to the Philadelphia Eagles offense. If you have any shot of being the number 1 team in your league, if you want to be better than the 11 other owners, more times than not, you're going to need to see the Philadelphia Eagles offense exceed expectations. So if you've already made that bet by drafting A.J. Brown, you better go ahead and you better pair him up with Jalen Hurts later on because you already made the bet. Minus will double down on said bet. That way we try to get away from getting 6th place in our fantasy league. And we either get first or we get last. Because you know what? If you ain't first, you're last. We know Ricky Bobby said it best, and that's what we need to be looking at. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to dive into the numbers behind this strategy, prove this for you, and at the end of the video, we can talk about exactly how you're going to implement this next season. That way you can get an edge over your opponents and maybe a couple different ways that you're not already thinking now. So let's look at that perfect example that we had with A.J. Brown as well as Jalen Hurts. Now we're pulling this data from RotoViz, and this is from Best Ball Contest. So I want to be completely honest, and I understand a lot of people think that Best Ball is where it's going to be most effective, but I'm telling you right now, the strategy works regardless. It's the underlying strategy fundamentals but we have to prove it with the numbers in best ball, because in those best ball contests, such as Underdog Fantasy, there are more real money drafts than anywhere else on the planet at this point. So we have more data that we can get from there than anywhere else. And of course, if you want to get into one of those drafts with us, we are drafting every single day on the live stream. Have not missed a day since April, not missed a day until 2024. We are getting in Underdog basketball drafts. There's no time commitment at all during the season. That's how I drafted 700 teams and how I won $150,000 last year on Underdog. And if you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, as well as a free trial to flockfantasy.com. It's also the place where you can check out all these player props. One of my favorite player props right now is going to be Jamar Chase plus 25 receiving yards versus Devontae Adams. I also really like Trevor Lawrence plus 50 passing yards in comparison to Dak Prescott. But let's go and let's look at the example of A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts from this past season. So if you're looking at win rate or top 6 percentage, what you want to see from a win rate perspective is you want to see above about 8.5%. 8.5% should be the baseline average. And from a top 6% perspective, you want to see over 50%. Because keep in mind, this is from 12-team leagues. So if you were looking at A.J. Brown by himself, he gave you a win rate of 16.3%. That's phenomenal. He was a massive hit in fantasy this past year. Now, if you're looking at Jalen Hurts by himself, he gave you a win rate of 14.5%. That's awesome. Jalen Hurts was a massive hit this past season. But if you took those two guys together, if you stacked them and made that one consolidated bet that you ended up getting right on, you won your league 25% of the time by making that one individual bet. Now, you can see the same thing with Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, where Kelce had a win rate of 17%. Mahomes had a win rate of 18.5%. They were phenomenal separate, but they were even better together. They were up at 28% for their win rate if you took those two guys together. You can even go a little bit deeper here. You can look at Evan Ingram and Trevor Lawrence. Both these guys were going incredibly cheap. You didn't really know what they were going to be going into last season. But if you were a believer in the Jacksonville Jaguars and you decided to pair these guys up together, you had a ton of success. I mean, Evan Ingram win rate of 16%, Trevor Lawrence at about 11%, but together they were up at 17.5%. And if you want to take a long, deep shot on a couple guys such as Tyler Lockett, Geno Smith from this past year, obviously that would be like going through and taking maybe Terry McLaurin and Sam Howell this season. And if they were to go out there and have a massive hit like Geno Smith, I mean, hell, you pretty much guarantee that you win your league. I mean, Lockett, 15% win rate this past year. Geno at about 12.5%, but together they were up at 32%. So you can see that when your stacks go right, you have such a leg up over the rest of your field where you could just straight up crush them based off expectations. Now, of course, there's the opposite end of the spectrum, and you're going to see that those stacks don't always work out, right? Like you're seeing Sutton and Russell Wilson being some of the biggest busts from last year. I mean, they had a win rate of only 7.4% together. Matt Ryan and Michael Pittman literally had a win rate of 0%. Yes, if you took Pittman in round 3 and you took Matt Ryan later on, there was no shot you won your league. If you're looking at Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, who also disappointed according to ADP, you had Keenan Allen with the win rate of 5%, Justin Herbert with the win rate of 4.6%, but together down at 1.2%. So you'll see that, yes, when you hit on your stack, you are getting way ahead of the rest of the field. Whereas if you whiff on your stack, you're going back to the end of the league. But that's what we're talking about. We're trying to get rid of getting 6th place, getting 5th place, getting 4th place, getting 7th place, getting 8th place. None of that crap matters. The only thing that matters is getting 1st, getting 2nd, and winning real money in your fantasy football league. Now, you can look at this for a multitude of different ways. I would say that data there is going to be extremely useful, regardless of if you're going to be playing in best ball, dynasty, redraft. It's going to help you a ton. But if you want to get a little bit more specific for best ball formats, like if you're going to be on Underdog, you can go through and you can look at examples of a quarterback 1 and a wide receiver 1 being stacked together, a quarterback 1 and a wide receiver 2 being stacked together. You can go all the way down the line where you'll actually see it's advantageous for you to pair up, say, like a wide receiver 2 and a wide receiver 4 from an individual offense. The example of that would be like Sky Moore as well as Marquez Valdes-Scantling, where if you would have paired up, say, the wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 2 of an offense, you actually had a top 2% finish in 2.41% of those entries. So you saw that, yeah, there was a ton of success, even just making correlated bets on individual offenses, even if you did not have the quarterback in said offense. Now, that's going to be a little bit more towards those best ball formats, such as Underdog Fantasy. It's not going to matter too much if you go ahead and take Sky Moore, Marquez Valdes-Scantling together in your regular redraft league. So if you're playing in your regular redraft format, say where you're only starting one quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex or 2, there you're going to be primarily focusing in on the elite level stacks. Whereas if you were having to draft in a best ball format and go 18 rounds deep, their building correlation throughout your entire lineup is going to be very important. But it just comes down to understanding your overall format and where you should be taking those bets. So if we're going to try to come up with some examples of what you can do this next season, what I want to first do is look at Underdog Fantasy and talk about some of my favorite stacks from a best ball perspective. We already mentioned one. One thing that I really like doing is going ahead and picking up Rashee Rice as well as Marquez Valdes-Scantling at their respective ADP. Now, if you're looking at the price point of these guys, they're pretty much free. They're going as like wide receiver 5s, wide receiver 6 in fantasy drafts right now. Now, to be completely transparent, do I expect either one of those wide receivers to ever make a real impact from like an ESPN league perspective? Probably not. But if you were in those deep best ball formats, if you go ahead and take 2 of those guys, what you're going to end up finding is you can win in a multitude of different ways. One, if the offense exceeds expectations overall, then great. They can both hit regardless. Or 2, what happens if the overall market is just getting the order of these wide receivers wrong? What if everybody thinks that Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore are the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 here in Kansas City? In reality, one of those guys may disappoint, or maybe both of them disappoint, and the market's wrong and you're able to have massive hits on both those other players. Or maybe, say, Travis Kelce in his age 34 season ends up going down, and that redistributes the target share from Kelce to the wide receiver room. So going ahead and making a bet like that in your best ball format is going to be highly advantageous. Now, if you're looking at your traditional ESPN redraft format, there you're going to be looking more so for the studs, right? You want to make sure that you're getting the elite level stacks. You want to take Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews on the same team. You want to go ahead and you want to take, say, Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley on the same team. In my mind, that's a pretty strong value right now if you're able to get Calvin Ridley in round 6 of your traditional redraft format and pair him up with Lawrence, because then you're making a consolidated bet saying, well, you know what? I think Ridley coming over to Jacksonville makes the Jacksonville Jaguars a top 3 passing offense overall. I think that you're going to have added on value for both Trevor Lawrence as well as Calvin Ridley in that situation. Now, of course, if they pull a Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen from last season, if one of these guys gets hurt and the overall offense disappoints overall, you can definitely crash and burn, right? But at the end of the day, we're trying to chase upside. We're trying to either get first or last place here. Now, there are a couple different ways you could approach this as well later on. If you wanted to go for a free quarterback, say you were a fan of the Indianapolis Colts offense this next season, and you're going, well, you know what, Mason? Anthony Richardson is straight up free. He's going at pick 131. I can get him as my quarterback too. And I got Jonathan Taylor in the 2nd round earlier. I got Michael Pittman in round 7 earlier. What you could also look to do is you can make a consolidated bet that maybe one of those quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson, who's currently going as QB 16, is better than the market expects year 1. Because if you were to go ahead and hit on a group of guys like that, then you could have access to that elite level ceiling, especially with the rushing upside of Anthony Richardson. But if things were to go wrong and say Anthony Richardson doesn't work out and you end up taking a small hit with Jonathan Taylor, a small hit with Michael Pittman in round 7, but you drafted Anthony Richardson as your quarterback too, you could still live to fight another day if one of your other stacks in your lineup actually worked out. So that's another thing that I like doing. And we showed the example of that last year where you decided to make that deep bet on a guy like Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett. Obviously, the opportunity cost was so low that you had a couple eggs in that basket. But if that basket didn't turn out to be the one you wanted to put those eggs in, it wasn't the end of the world, right? Because you didn't go ahead and take that guy in round 1. You didn't take him in round 2. You didn't even take him in round 3. Now, a couple different options you could be looking at late as well if you wanted to just go and take some very cheap shots on stacks where maybe things could work out. If you wanted to make a bet that possibly the Denver Broncos offense saw a bounce back this next year, you could see Russell Wilson, quarterback 17, as your second quarterback, and then go ahead and pair him up with his wide receiver 1 in Jerry Jeudy, where Jerry Jeudy's going as the wide receiver 27. So if you grabbed Jerry Jeudy as your wide receiver 3, grab Russell Wilson as your quarterback 2, and Sean Payton's able to turn this offense around, then great. Maybe both guys exceed expectations. Whereas, obviously, if they continue to be very bad like they were a year ago, then it's no harm, no foul, right? I mean, hell, your wide receiver 3 may disappoint a little bit. Your quarterback 2, you can just cut him. Who the hell cares? And if we are going to be talking about the most we want to be spending on these guys, I've said this before, but if you are in an underdog draft where you have to go pretty damn deep, I don't love the idea of taking Kelsey and Mahomes in the first and second round, because in those underdog drafts, it's going to be almost impossible to find wide receiver value later on. Running back value you can find, but if you are in your casual redraft format, like in ESPN League, where you're saying, well, you know what, Mason, my league mates, they're idiots. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to crush them. I'm going to grab Calvin Ridley in round 6. There, I could easily see you wanting to go ahead and take Travis Kelce round 1, Patrick Mahomes round 2, especially if you only had to start 2 wide receivers, where those onesie positions were going to make up a higher percentage of your starting lineup output on a week-to-week basis overall, and you could just go out there and crush the rest of the field. But I hope this helped, ladies and gentlemen. I want to dive in to the numbers behind this stuff. Want to give you just a 360 view of how you can implement it for the exact draft that you are in. Of course, if you enjoyed it, please go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to get into a 2023 fantasy football draft with us, we are streaming every single day on this channel. We are going to do those underdog drafts on Underdog Fantasy. They're best balls, so no time commitment at all during the year. You can use promo code FLOCK for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Plus, you'll get our 2023 fantasy football rankings and a free trial to flockfantasy.com with promo code FLOCK. The same place, so you can check out all those player props. My 3 favorite player props right now are Jamar Chase plus 25 receiving yards versus Devontae Adams, Nick Chubb plus half a rushing touchdown versus Josh Jacobs, and Trevor Lawrence plus 50 passing yards versus Dak Prescott. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you, and really hope I get a draft with you in a live stream later tonight.